From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
I am a Jesus follower.
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 Jesus' constant invitation to those he encountered was, "Come and follow me." It's his invitation to us as well. But have you ever wondered, what does it mean to follow Jesus? Where is he taking us? What does he want to accomplish on this journey? For those who choose to follow Jesus, their lives are never the same.
And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good.
Jesus came to give life, and life to the full. It's a good life, a beautiful life. It's a changed life, a life formed and reshaped to look like Jesus. It's not a life without struggle, defect, or failure, but a life molded by being with Jesus that changes us from the inside out, so much so that we become a people who think and act like him.
I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God.
Good morning, Journey. We showed that video several months ago as a launching off to where we are this year and where we're headed, and a reminder of this verse that has become very present with us. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 22 through 24. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by deceitful desires, and to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. See, in this text, Paul turns and he says, you were intended to be something different. Like, you were taught to live a new kind of life. Right before we get to this text, he describes what that old way of life used to look like. And it's some picture. Like, he describes things like futile thinking, meaning the way that you think, it leads to nothingness. Darkened in their understanding, a similar concept, but quite literally walking around in the dark without any clue where you're going or what you're trying to accomplish. Separated from God. Like the definition of hell. Ignorance. A complete lack of understanding of who we are, what this world is really about. He says that ignorance comes because our hearts are hard. Like, we're not sensitive to the right kinds of things. We're not sensitive to God's way. Morally, spiritually. He says because we're not sensitive, we indulge in every kind of impurity. That language of impurity is like uncleanness. it makes me think about my kids growing up. We had a boxer. She just passed away. Why should I say passed away? She died. My dog died, Reagan. Reagan's home for the weekend. Now she wants to shoot me. So we had a boxer for 13 years. And what do you do with the boxer with your kids when you've got a backyard? One of the regular chores is poop duty. Right? Because it's the worst thing in the world to go out and watch your kids play in the backyard and them come in with poop all over them. That's the imagery here, right? To indulge in all kind of uncleanness. Like you can't play in a pig pen and not get poop on you, right? But then he follows it up with this constant greed for more of that. Like they want to roll around in it. So when Paul says you were taught with regard to your former way of life, that's what he's talking about. He says, put off the old self. Like this old person, that way of thinking, that way of functioning in life, like take it off like it's a poop stained jacket. Like just get rid of it. Because it's being corrupted by its deceitful desires. And we talked about this in our last series, in our One Flesh series, right? We talked about being drawn toward and having desires for things that are just rotten on the inside. And so we're full of poop illustrations today, so let's just keep going, right? It's like the illustration we used was it's chocolate-covered feces. Like it looks really good, and you really want it, and you get into it, and you're like, oh my gosh, I just ate something nasty. That's what this is. He's like, we're done with that. And so let's be made new. And he describes specifically how we're made new. To be made new in the attitude of our minds. Like quite literally, we become a people that begin to think like Jesus. Like imagine every experience that you encounter on this planet being run through the mind of Christ. That's where Paul's taking us. He says, as you do that, put on this new self. Like it's not a poop-stained jacket anymore. It's something really, really good. Created to be like God. Like remember from our One Flesh series, we're image bearers. We carry the image of God in Jesus by renewing us, by remaking us, by putting His new self on us. We are the fullest expression of the image bearers of God on this planet. We look like Him in the way we act. Because it comes from the inside out. This is where we have been for quite some time as a church family. We have a banner that talks about transforming 500 lives, and we're moving towards celebrating these kinds of real changes in our life together. We've asked you, and for some time, I have continued to come back to it, and I'm gonna hound you. If we're hanging out in the middle of the afternoon and my phone doesn't go off at 4:22, you need to yell at me, right? We want to invite you to set your phones at 4:22 to mark this verse, Ephesians 4:22, and pray with us about this. Pray first about yourself, about how we are becoming people who think like Him in everything, and therefore become a people who respond out of that and reflect the righteousness and holiness of God in just the way we live. But there's some questions that we need to ask about this. Like, we just last month, when we started our year, we celebrated these transforming lives by talking about all the responses to Christ and all the different ways we're seeing this happen. But here's my question for you today. Do you believe that this transformation is available to you personally? Or is it just something that we're going to watch with our family? Do we own this for ourselves? I think there's two issues that challenge us here. Number one, asking the question of ourselves, is God really that involved in my life? And then turning to actually deal with how we think and view ourselves. What is our self-talk in relationship with Jesus? Do we tell ourselves, well, this is just who I am. This is who I've always been. I'm not going to change. And dig in and really not want to change, or maybe even the worst part of believe that change for me isn't possible. Like, I've struggled with this thing my entire life. Like, God's not going to deal with that. I want to tell you that it's wrong thinking. And Jesus doesn't think about us in those terms. What would happen if we considered and thought of ourselves the way that He did? Adam, when he led us into communion, he read from the Sermon on the Mount, the first part of Matthew chapter 5 that we call the Beatitudes. It's the blessings. And in that, Jesus gives us a picture of how He thinks about us, what He expects to be in our lives. When He looks at us, He says, you're the people that are going to be given the riches of the kingdom of God. You're the people who are going to be comforted when you mourn. You're the people who are filled with the right way with God, filled with righteousness. You're the people, get this, who deserve mercy. You're the people who are able to see God. You're the people who are called children of God. You're the people who will inherit the kingdom of God. See, Jesus intends to bless us. When he thinks about us and he thinks about us submitting and turning our lives over to him, he thinks about all of the good that is going to come, even in the midst of struggle. I go back and read that first half of that section. All that first half is all full of struggle. And Jesus, the way that he thinks about that for you is there's blessing for you in this. Like, watch what I do with this. In fact, Jesus has a really high view of you. I think often higher than we view ourselves. Jesus says that we're salt and light. Because he's in us, he is the light of the world. We carry that light with us. Like, he has a very high view of us because we're attached to him. We are the people who preserve the good things of God in the world. We are the people who reflect his way and his wonder in the midst of a world that does not. Jesus believes in you. Like, we talk about our belief in Jesus. But Jesus believes in you. Because he believes in the transforming power of God at work in your life. There's a text that quotes Jesus in John chapter 7, verse 38. He says this. He says, "Whoever believes in me, as the scriptures have said, rivers of living water will flow within them." Two pieces of belief that are important for us. Number one, that we believe in Jesus, right? But number two, that we actually believe that rivers of living water flow within us because of that. Like, it has made, our belief in Jesus has made a profound and life-changing reality for us now. I can't think about this image without thinking about a trip that we took with our kids. The summer before my son went to college, we were gifted a trip and spent about a week and a half. And one of the things that we ended up doing was going to Niagara Falls. And the wonder of that and the beauty of that and the majesty of God, I can't think of these springs of living water without this image coming to my mind. But there's another image in it. Because when we hiked down underneath the falls and the water's just crashing right in front of us, my now 14-year-old that was it 6 years ago? He was 9? I don't know. He was little. He ran right in front of that water, and there was this joy coming out of him. He threw his arms up like this and just was jumping up and down. Why am I crying about this? And just screaming with emphatic joy at this wonder. It's probably the highlight of our trip. I want to tell you, that ought to be our response to this. Like there's something wonderful in store for us. And it's not theory. It is a reality in Him with us. It begins by submitting our lives and our hearts and our minds over to Jesus. By starting with how He thinks about us. If Jesus sees us a certain way, we ought to say yes, sir, and agree with Him. There's a story in Matthew chapter 12. When Jesus is teaching, He's in a house and He's being challenged by the religious leaders, and like the challenge is real, threatening potentially His life, challenging Him that potentially He's of Satan. At the end of that, some people come to Him and tell Him his mother and brothers have come to see Him. Well, in Mark chapter 3, he gives us a little bit more, and Mark chapter 3 tells us that his mothers and brothers came to take charge of him, thinking he was out of his mind. But Jesus' response to someone in the midst of this environment, this challenging environment, that his family had come, his response was this. Matthew 12:50. Who are my mother and brothers? Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. See, Charity, Jesus, when He looks at us, He thinks of us as family. Like, quite literally, the Lord of all creation is our brother. We are brothers and sisters with Him. He is become part of us. And we have become we have become family with Him. Like if He views you that way, how should we now view ourselves? At the end of Jesus' ministry, John chapter 15, Jesus is preparing His disciples for Him to leave. It's right before He goes to the cross. And there's all this conversation. But in the middle of his exit, He turns and He says to them, as the Father, like our Father, because we're brothers, right? As the Father has loved me, so I've loved you. Encourages them. Do what I say. Follow my words. And He comes back and He says, if you do that, my love will remain in you just as the Father has remained in me. He says, I tell you this so that my joy will be in you and your joy may be complete. God, Jesus' intention is for us to live with confidence and excitement and contentment in Him because what He's done that looks like my son jumping at the bottom of Niagara Falls. I tell you that my love will remain in you, like I got you, so that my joy will be complete in you. There is nothing on this planet that is of higher value to Jesus than you. Then he finishes by saying this joy will lead to love, and that's my command. Love each other. Love each other like I've loved you. Like, now that you think different, go act different. Go reflect this. And then he finishes with this beautiful picture of his relationship with them. And he says this in verse 13 through 15. He says, greater love has no one than this, to lay one's life down for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. We are not only brothers and sisters with Jesus. He not only sees us that way, but He chooses us. When I think about being a friend with Jesus, I think about my friends that gather in my living room and act like fools when Dak throws a touchdown pass. I think about how close Jesus is to us. How He chooses that for you and me. Jesus says, my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I and them, and you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you loved me. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am and to see me in my glory. The glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Righteous Father, though the world does not know you, I know you, and they know you sent me. I've made you known to them and will continue to make you known in order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. Jesus not only calls you family, he calls you friends, and he calls you the host of his life, because he's entered in. He could not believe in you more because he knows what his God is capable of.